I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Max Ware shares a wide range of experiences today. As the owner of Bowerbird in Melbourne, an advocate of all things local, he gives us insight on how teams can galvanise as a result of the hard times and some of the struggles today of operating in a competitive hospitality environment. Hello and welcome to the show, Max.
Thanks, mate. Thank you for having me.
No worries at all, mate. No worries at all. As you know, the first question I like to ask is, what is your crazy hospitality story?
There's a lot of things in hospitality that you're not allowed to tell, stories that you're not allowed to retell. And I've got a few that I probably aren't either podcast friendly or criminally friendly.
That's okay. Don't incriminate anybody, but...
I thought probably I'd give you, instead of probably my craziest hospitality story, I'd give you one of my funnier sort of hospitality stories. I think probably outlines to a lot of hospitality people how quickly things can go wrong and how quickly you need to work on your feet to turn it around. So I think it would have been about 10 years ago now. I was running quite a big, serious venue. Basically, everyone who works in hospitality knows that pretty much November to end of December are going to be your two busiest months of the year. You're back-to-back functions. You've got New Year's in there. You've got Christmas in there. You've got Christmas Day in there. So everyone's running on empty. We'd done a ginormous November, stupid amounts of money. Everyone was dying. We weren't open on a Wednesday. Lying in bed on a Wednesday after we've done this big week. And I get this phone call and it's the client. And the client's saying, "Hi, we're just outside wondering if we can get in." And I didn't even click as to what it was. And my first reaction was just say to her, "Where are you? Where are you calling from?" And she said, "We're calling from outside the venue. We've got a 250 people function booked in for today."
Oh.
So I've naturally shit my pants. Got no stuff. The venue isn't open. The venue probably isn't clean. There's no one down there. What am I going to do? I sort of jumped on my bike really quickly. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "There's been a sewage leak."
Yeah.
I said, "There's been a sewage leak. We've got people in there at the moment. We can't open it up. All of the toilets have overflowed. It's horrific. Can I just get you to jump down to another venue quickly? We're going to be in there. We're going to clean it up. I think we're going to have it all sorted out for you in an hour to an hour and a half."
Yep.
So she said, "Okay, not a problem. Where should we go?" And I said, "Just give me 2 minutes. I'm just organising somewhere for you." So I jumped on the phone, called a friend who I knew had a pub down the road, said to him, "I need to open up a bar tab for these guys, whatever they want. I need them down in your pub for 2 hours. Can you take them? There's 250 of them." Meanwhile, I'm in the car, shaving, cleaning my teeth, doing a full Mr. Bean on the way, working my way through the streets, on the phone to my supervisors, "Get up. Let's go. We've got a 250 people function." I managed to get 3 staff in by, I think it was about midday. She'd called me at 10 a.m. 3 of us in by midday. We had the venue open by 12:30. We had them inside the venue drinking. We're driving along. I'm calling chefs. I'm calling friends. I need catering. I got in, I realised I didn't have the catering for them. I said, "Unfortunately, the sewage has actually backed out the fridges." So all this, ginormous, massive lie.
Legitimate lie, though. That could have happened.
I mean, this is what hospitality is at the end of the day. It's about what can I do to make sure that we come on top. I had a boss years ago who said to me, it wouldn't matter whether the back of house was on fire, the front of house always needs to be calm. So once the doors open and you walk out on that stage, that's just the way you are. You're ready to go. Anyway, we ended up ordering external catering from another bar down the road, got everything, got the food in, got the staff in, got the venue open, got everything done, ran their function, 5-star review, wonderful time, couldn't believe how good it was, turned this thing on its head. So as far as, a crazy day as what allows you to see sort of sometimes how insane hospitality is when it's not there. So this function had been lost on file somewhere, wasn't on the functions wall, hadn't been gone to anything. No one in the office had any recollection of it. This was something that had just somehow ticked all those impossible boxes that we set up for us to ever be able to never make mistakes like this. And somehow it slipped through the cracks and we managed to turn this around and make something special out of it. So
that is awesome.
All different alcohol than what they had ordered, a different area of the venue than what they had ordered. and we managed to get this thing through and get a 5-star review out of it. And I always say, whenever people ask me sort of, what's your definition of hospitality, I always say, running around with your pants on fire, acting like they're not.
Well, that sounds very appropriate a lot of the time. And that's awesome that you came out on top, because there is a lot against you in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, you're either going to sit there and say, I'm terribly sorry, and get the worst review that you've ever had in your entire life. And we live for reviews, bad reviews, especially with functions, especially with corporate functions as well. They're not going to be particularly happy with you when you completely drop the ball on a function. So that's my one. I say to all the guys who work for me now, there's nothing that you guys can ever say or ever do that I probably haven't done.
Yep.
And that's the reason why I won't do them again. That's why now we refunction about 85,000 times, and make sure that we've got everything. We call them on the day and we make sure that we're all in. But, you do get these venue on fire moments. And I think it's the thing that galvanizes your team as well, that brings you together, is these moments where you sort of stop at the end of this 10-hour shift and you look at each other and you say, I don't know how we pulled that off, but we pulled that off and people appear to be happy.
Yeah, thank you for that story, Max. The first question I like to ask in the episode, after the crazy story, is why you do what you do.
I guess most of us, I'll make a generalization here, and I apologize to anyone listening who's not like this, but in my experience, this is the case. I think most of us that end up in bars and kitchens are wired a little bit differently. Maybe we were different at school. I know there are exceptions to the rule, and I know some people who have actually chosen to do this who were studying to be in law and accountants and stuff like that. But generally, in my experience, most of us who end up in this as a career. And I make that definition as well because you've got career hospitality and you've got hospital assistance. So hospitality for assistance, and the idea that it's either getting you through uni or getting you some extra money or getting you where you're going. And there is that definition between us. But I guess guys who are career hospitality, we're not wired the same as other people. We enjoy the rush. We enjoy situations like that I just told you in my story. We somehow get a kick out of that and get a rise out of it and get this great emotive connection to that a normal person wouldn't have. A normal person would look at that from the outside and say, that sounds like one of the most horrible experiences of your life. And yes, in the moment, it's not a nice place to be. But I guess the big thing about hospitality is the feeling that you get after you've achieved the unachievable, the 350 people, Mother's Day lunch when the kitchen printer breaks down and you don't realize for the first half an hour that there's no dockets going to the kitchen.
Yeah.
The overpacked nightclub 5 deep at the bar for 5.5 hours when you're standing with wet feet and it feels like it's never going to end and it's insurmountable. There's something about real hospitality people that somehow get this, unhealthy connection to this, and we actually start to seek it out, after years and years and years. I know guys who leave the industry and come back within 2 years just to work 1 day a week or to work 2 days a week just so that they can get that again because they've gone and they've sat in an office situation and they can't feel that anymore. They can't feel that connection to the team. To come back to your question of why do I do this? I still enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I wish I didn't still enjoy it at coming up to my mid-30s now. There are moments where you think about it, but for me, it's all about the rush. It's all about the connection with people. I get to connect with, 100 people a night, 150 people a night. I'm not in an office with the same 6 people doing the same thing, going to the same place. And yes, you get bad connections with people, but I mean, to steal a phrase from my very, very first ever serious boss, a guy called Peter Kirst, who was my boss when I worked at the Hilton when I was 18, an annoying customer is a present. It's a gift. It's an opportunity for you to see how good you are and to try and turn them around. So even difficult customers, real good hospitality people sit there and say, I'm going to get you. By the end of the night, I'm going to get you. You're going to stop being a prick and you're going to feel bad about the way you've acted because I'm going to be so nice.
It's turning that into a challenge. I mentioned in the previous episode about the Apple recruitment process, but I learned that at Apple is that they train that into you pretty hard, that you are able to turn any experience into a positive one. And that's applied in life. I look at things like any negativity that comes at me, I try to digest and turn it into a positive. So how can I look at this positively? How can I convert this experience into a positive one? And it's all about using a different lens, applying a different lens. Coming back to joining the team or galvanizing the team, hospitality has both. I've seen both the best and worst workplace environments.
When it all comes burning down, it is a horrible thing to see. You know, when a team actually loses and they lose the battle, it's
bad.
Nice. I think I've maybe had it once in my career where we've all sort of thrown our hands up and said, like, we're done, we're gone.
Yeah.
We can't do this anymore.
And that's a bad feeling when you can't salvage that. It is over. But, you know, you hope that you're not going to get there. But the thing is that in the end, and I heard this from a gentleman who I respect in the industry, and he said to me, in the end, we always win. In the end, we always win. Whether you run out of booze or you close, in the end, you always win.
Yeah, I think it's just always an opportunity. I mean, I've worked in bars where the keg system has gone down 20 minutes before the function's walked in. If you think that you have the time in hospitality to stand there and throw your hands up, for every minute that you're panicked, it means that you're not working towards the solution that you need to get yourself over the line. And it doesn't matter whether that, you know, there might be the perfect solution, the second best solution, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, you know, the whole way down. At some point, there has to be some kind of a solution. You have to be able to resolve something somehow. I mean, even if that means walking around a 300 people restaurant, putting a $50, $60 voucher on everyone's table and saying, I'm terribly sorry, we've lost gas to the kitchen. There's no food coming out, we've lost gas to the kitchen. And that's happened as well to me. The more you go through things like this over the course of your career, the more times bad things happen, the better and better and better you get at dealing with them. I mean, and that's why I always come back to really silly things that I got taught really, really early in my hospitality career that stuck with me. Things like what I said before about, you know, a difficult customer being a present. Things like there always being a solution. You know, silly things like the customer is always right. You know, it doesn't matter whether the customer is standing there screaming in your face. You know, the idea of having a bartender turn around and abuse them or swear at them it doesn't compute with me. I say to the guys, you stand there with a smile on your face and you say, absolutely, sir, I appreciate that you are irate at this point. I don't appreciate that you're swearing at me. Hopefully we should be able to have a conversation and come to some form of resolution. And some people just go nuts over that. You know, it drives them even more and more and more insane. But I never think there's a place for a bartender or a waitress or anyone to stand there, you know, and start screaming back at the client, because I just think then you've almost brought yourself down to that level. And I use this word a lot, hospitality professional. And I think there's a real big difference between hospitality workers and hospitality professionals. And when you come into a venue, you know, when I go into venues and I come across hospitality professionals, I'm always really elated by that, dealing with someone who I've watched go and handle the situation really well, passionately make that drink beyond, you know, what anyone else in the bar is doing. You know, I think that's something that is the cornerstone of the industry, are these hospitality professionals.
The listeners of this show are hospitality professionals. They're the people who are ambitious, curious, the innovative minds in the hospitality industry, the people who are passionate about the industry and want to help it grow. And they're the people that we target through what we're doing. That I'm one of those people, and they're the people that I want to reach. So they're definitely the ones listening to the show, and they'll be able to understand when you say the difference between hospitality professional and hospitality worker.
I think that's an interesting, you know, topic as well, that the industry is not really, I mean, it doesn't really address at the moment, and it doesn't address it in a couple of different ways. It doesn't address it from a monetary perspective. I mean, you can get me on all sorts of rants about penalty rates and things like that, and I'm someone who is anti-penalty rate. That's not because I don't believe in the right for workers to earn more money on the weekends. What I believe is that the base rate is set so high on top of the penalty that for the business, it's now becoming out of reach for the business to be able to actually reward the people who go the extra mile, because the median rate of what they pay is so high. Prior to penalty rates, you know, you had guys who were on $18 an hour, guys who were on $20 an hour, guys who were on $25 an hour. And there was an element of the better you were, the more you got paid, or the more you connected with your job, the more you got.
Yeah.
And I think that's something now that there seems to be somehow a bit of a separation between the hospitality professional and the hospitality worker, because they are essentially paid the same. And in Melbourne, especially, where the tipping rate isn't super, super high. I saw this when we went over to America. You had bar staff and you had bar professionals, and the bar professionals were raking tips. I mean, to the point where we were like, this is insane. Now, granted, it's very different. Their base rate is nothing over there. But that's something that I've always sort of felt within our industry, that as a business owner, you want to pay your good guys more, but it's a struggle to be able to pay them more when the median rate is so high. Could ramble on about this point for ages.
Yeah.
And look, it's a point of conjecture, and a lot of people, when I talk to them about this, they either don't understand the point of view that I have, or they heavily disagree with it. And that's fine, because it's a point of view, and that's the important thing about opinions.
We can come back to wages a little bit later in the episode, but what I want to ask you about, Max, is what you're doing now. What do you do? And tell us about your journey to get to where you are.
So I guess my journey is a bit of an interesting journey in the sense that I haven't followed sort of a linear path. I've been in hospitality since I was 17. I've been in hospitality since I was 15, but I've been in proper real hospitality since I was 17. And I've had a really, really diverse career. So I started at the Hilton Hotel, Hilton on the Park in Melbourne, which was in banquets and in hotel and things like that. Ended up working my way into bars somehow in there as sort of an 18-year-old. Moved over into pubs sort of young at sort of 18, 19. Got on a plane, went over to London and worked in an award-winning restaurant in South London, and that's really where I cut my teeth. It was the first place I walked into where being mediocre wasn't acceptable. To get behind the bar at this place, you had to sit down and do something they called the knowledge, which was a blank piece of paper, and you had to be able to write down your 50 classics. You had to be able to sit there and check them off, and you were not getting into the bar before you did that. And that was fantastic for me. That was a world that I'd never understood before. You need to know all the regionalities of all 30 of these wines. You need to know everything on the back bar. You need to know all your cocktails because the standard is such. So London was amazing. So I came back from London a bona fide cocktail bartender. I felt that I was a bona fide cocktail bartender. I knew my shit. And this is a big point for me as a young bartender, because I came back and I was like, I now know my shit. I can now go get proper jobs. Picked up a couple of cocktail bar jobs. Answered an ad in a paper for what I thought was a brewery, and it turned out to be this giant mega nightclub in Docklands in Melbourne that wasn't even built yet. So I went through the interview process never having stepped into the venue, never really understanding what it was, and it wasn't until sort of the interview process I found out it was this giant nightclub. I'd never had any desire to work in a nightclub in my life. And I took the job. I think within about 6 months, I was a bar supervisor. Within about 8 months, I was a bar manager. And within 2 years, I was a venue manager. And they ended up venue managing it for about 5 years after that. Fell into an opportunity, but worked really hard to sort of take all those opportunities. And the nightclub was a place called Alhambra, which for the time I was there was a really well-respected, very different, run by really different guys. Some great mentors there. A guy called Adam Sala, a guy called Simon Digby, basically sort of took me from a 22-year-old bartender and turned me into a manager, essentially, and a good one at that. I ended up there for a long time. Then I decided I wanted a different challenge. I went to Crown Casino. I ended up 18 months in Crown Casino. I had did the takeover of Neil Perry's The Waiting Room when it changed hands, which was an amazing experience, amazing crystal cut cocktail bar. I had the launch of the new Atrium Bar, which is a champagne bar, which had one of the biggest champagne selections in the Southern Hemisphere. Sort of $15,000 bottles that have been lifted up from the ocean floor from a Spanish freighter, that had sunk, and we sold a couple of those, and, really, really interesting stuff. Bottles of Martel Lior and, old cognacs and stuff like that, really interesting. And naturally, being in Crown Casino, you're dealing with people who are coming down, having, made big wins and things like that. All of a sudden, a $2,000 shot of cognac's not so much.
It's those stories that really bring people together, bring a patron to become interested and excited by the product.
And those levels of hospitality, I probably never would have seen those levels of hospitality. Those levels of just sheer money, like actually being able to sell, a $15,000 bottle of champagne. It was just insane. But completely different world, Crown Casino, almost un-Melbourne. Like, you've sort of got the rest of the industry in Melbourne, and then you have Crown. It's a monster of its own. So anyway, I left Crown. I ended up going and taking over a couple of rooftop bars, the Emerald Peacock and the Red Hummingbird. I was there for maybe another year and a half, and I decided I wanted to go do something completely different again. So I went and took over a really old pub, which was the Geebung Polo Club. I think it was 1884. This pub was built in. Beautiful, immaculate, old original stuff the whole way through it. Then I ended up going and running what's really like a super pub in Melbourne, which is the College Lawn in Paran for a period of time, which anyone who lives in Melbourne has gone to the College Lawn on a Sunday. It's sort of 1,000 people of insanity in this giant beer garden. And then I bought my own bar. I bought Bowerbird, which is where I'm sitting today doing the interview. And so I guess what I was saying at the start, the diversity is that I went from, hotels into restaurants, into cocktail bars, into nightclubs, into a casino, into lounge bars in the city, into old pubs, into new pubs, into owning my own bar. So I guess it's a long-winded story, but I guess it's quite a long career in the scheme of things now in hospitality when you look back on it and you say, well, I've been in the industry 15 years now.
Having that diverse experience, I think, is really encouraged and supported in hospitality, but in other industries it's not as welcomed, which is unfortunate because I believe that having had many different experiences allows us to see things differently to other people who haven't been able to synthesize all that information and distill it into the core knowledge that we get from all of these different areas. And you can draw on knowledge. You kind of become this like hospitality polymath where you can see all of these things and then you come down to the information or the knowledge that you need in the end. So I think it's very, very valuable. Have you found it valuable to you? And
I think that the reason why I have been able to do what I did, and I bought my first venue at 30, which I think is, in the scheme of things in the industry is not that common. In fact, just buying in the industry and owning isn't that common. I mean, that's something that we can touch on and talk about later is sort of the endpoints of the industry. But I mean, the guys that I sort of came through with as a competitive cocktail bartender, there's maybe 5 guys from, I guess, my generation of bartending. I guess a generation of bartending is probably, a 4 or 5 year spell, and then it tends to change over. But for my generation, there's maybe, I think there's 3, 4, maybe 5 of us who own, and the rest of us have probably moved into repping or, because bartending has a shelf life. By the time I'm not saying for everyone, and I'm not saying that bartending should have a shelf life or there's any discrimination on older bartenders, but just the nature of the industry is that it's a young person's industry. And by the time generally you've ticked over kind of 30, 35, you need to start looking into things that diversify outside of that. And that tends to be moving into repping roles, brand ambassador roles, working with distilleries, in breweries, things like that. The whole diversity thing, it's actually something that in my experience, I'm not finding that much in the industry now. And I've got a few guys, who have worked for me for a long time. They often sort of ask me, what should I do next? What should I do next? And I say to them, well, you've been in cocktail bars now for 6 years. You've never done anything but a cocktail bar. Or you've been in nightclubs for 6, 7 years. You've never done anything but a nightclub. So no matter what, you are only going to have a limited window of experiences within those environments. Whereas when you've worked in restaurants and when you've worked in hotels and you've worked in nightclubs and you've worked in bars and lounge bars, piano bars, champagne lounges, just your broad spectrum of experiences is so great that you're able to, I guess, take pieces out of everything and amalgamate yourself into a much more, pure, much more refined manager just based on the experiences. I think, and I say to people all the time, and I say to everyone who wants to have a long career in hospitality, please diversify. You're not going to miss out on anything by not spending 6 years. And I even mean that about venues. I say to people, especially young guys, I say, unless you are progressing, so unless you're moving up. So I stayed at Lumber for a very long time. I think I was there for it's either 5 or 6 years in the end. But I don't think there was a year that went by that I didn't progress in my role from being a head bartender, a section supervisor, a bar manager, a venue manager, the whole way across the years.
You mentioned there that hospitality professionals or bartenders should be looking at other areas of the industry to move into in their, late 20s to mid 30s. And you mentioned rep, ambassador, distillery or brewery or owning venues.
I know guys that have gone into car sales, done really well in car sales.
But within the industry, what I'm trying to show people is that there are so many facets of hospitality. It doesn't have to be just if you've worked in a bar to stay behind the bar, if you've been in a cafe to stay behind the cafe, or to, because the options people look at are like, okay, I've been here for a while. What are my options? I can become a rep, brand ambassador, or own something. I
mean, no, there's so many. I probably sold that a bit short because you've got roles in acquisitions. You know, you've got roles in warehousing, you've got roles in recruitment, HR. Like, the industry is broad, and all of these people need to come together to make, you know, especially big business work. That's what going to somewhere like Crown massively taught me, because there's support everywhere. I mean, you've got training systems that you need to have put in place. People need to provide that training. Like I said, you know, as far as recruitment and accruals and settlement and stuff like that, it's so broad. You know, so you're absolutely right in what you say. You know, there is a whole world to hospitality that goes on behind what people see, which is front-facing service.
What I want to really show people is that there are experiences and there are opportunities available in the near future that aren't here yet, but they will be. There are things like, how is social media going to evolve? How is technology going to affect the hospitality industry? How are things like VR and AR going to affect the industry? How are chatbots going to affect reservation systems and processes and venues? If you're innovative enough and you're forward-thinking enough, you can take advantage of these opportunities that are yet to affect the industry more completely. You could be someone who becomes a platform for the future of the hospitality industry. That's what I'm trying to inspire through the Hospopreneurs podcast. Anyone who's been listening for a while knows that these are the things that I talk about on the show and try to get out of guests and to share their experiences and insights. A lot of it's on the ground floor. People have moved from being a dishy up to owning chains. The industry is very deep. The industry is very deep and complex. And if we go back to the idea that you said there, 15 years, you've covered a lot of ground, a lot of different facets of the industry. Even then, and no disrespect, there's so much more to the industry than even what you've covered in 15 years.
Absolutely.
What I want to show people is that it is incredibly deep, incredibly interesting, and that there's a lot of value that hospitality can share with the business world. There are business listeners and there are hospitality listeners, and everyone is an incredibly ambitious and passionate person. So, and I know when you're listening at home, you'll be like, oh my God, that sounds like me. That is exactly what I'm going for. What I want to ask you next, Max, is we've talked about why you do what you do. We've talked a bit about what you do. We've talked about your experience in the industry. I want to ask you about what you're learning about or exploring at the moment.
So I guess for the last 2 years, well, since we opened up Bowerbird here in Richmond in Melbourne, we've been exploring a lot more about the idea of selling the people behind the products that we sell, not the products themselves. I mean, to give you a bit of background in what we do here at Bowerbird, we are a gin bar in the sense that we promote a large back bar of gin. Within that system of selling gin, we stick to being only Victorian. So I think we've got 50 something now Victorian gins, I think from about 20 different distillers, all Victorian wine, all Victorian beer. The fit out of the venue has been done in either reclaimed, recycled, salvaged Victorian materials or made by Victorian artists. When we put together the concept of the bar, what I was adamant about and what I really wanted to do was I didn't want to just create another bar that was based around alcohol. I wanted it to be based around the people who made the alcohol and the stories that we can tell around that. So what I'm exploring, I guess, at the moment as a business owner, more about connections. So I'm trying to make a connection with the people who are making the product, trying to make a connection even with the people who they're buying the product from. So with gin, you know, where are you getting the botanicals from? Can we go and talk to the guys who get the botanicals? When we talk about certain things here, you know, if people come in there and ask us about a product, then we won't spend a great deal amount of time talking to them about the product, about how it was made, you know, what still it was made in or what methods were used and, you know, whether it was macerated, whether it was any of these things. What we tend to do is people walk in and I say, this is my mate Cam's gin from Balcombe. He's an ex-wine maker and this is what he wanted to purvey to you. So it's the idea of us sort of now putting a face to the things that we're selling instead of it just being about the product that we're actually moving. And that's been a really interesting journey over the 2 years, seeing how people actually respond to that, how they connect with that with Instagram. You know, that people are actually telling people things and people are taking photos of their drink and they're not just saying, oh, you know, this is a aviation with a maraschino foam. They're saying, this is Balcombe, you know, this is Animus, this is Kildurk, and this is Patient Wolf. But more so that these are the people behind it and this is what they they were wanting to put out into the industry. And I think that's really, because even from an economic perspective, as the cost of living is getting higher and higher and higher, people's disposable income is getting less and less and less. I mean, you look at the growth of Dan Murphy's, or I guess the growth of Woolworths and Coles. I mean, they're growing massive amounts year on year on year. People are starting to cook more at home again because it's harder to go out to restaurants and eat all the time. There's not as much disposable income, especially here in Melbourne, third most expensive city in the world. So the idea of how you actually get people to want to part with their money can't just be about the alcohol anymore, because I can just go to Dan Murphy's and buy that booze a whole lot cheaper and sit at home.
Yeah.
It's got to be more about the connections that we make with people and how we make them feel that within, say, the $12 for that gin, that they're not just spending $12 on gin. They're spending maybe, $6 on gin, $2 on the comfortable chair they're sitting in. They're spending $2 to listen to the music. They're spending $2 to hear the story. There's some kind of greater connection with it that helps them part with that money and feel that that was still valuable to them.
But then how do you justify a higher price to cover costs like that? Because there's this pressure to increase costs from the local nature of products, and they become more expensive when economies of scale haven't kicked in and the business isn't large enough to have a cheap enough product for a retail business to make a margin. Then, right, so you got to justify that to a customer. And do patrons see the value, and how do you communicate that value in, like you described, $2 for the chair, $2 for the ambience, $2, how do you communicate that to a patron? Are they seeing it?
I guess those things are more of an emotive connection, not a verbal connection. So when you when you walk into a venue, it's small things. For years and years and years, I always used to get told about things called perfect rooms. Right, so perfect rooms were like, before a function, we'd go around and make sure that any PowerPoints that weren't on were switched to off. These very small, like finite 1% things, making sure that the decals on your beer taps are straight, making sure that your wine glasses are straight. One of my biggest mentors, I think I mentioned him before, Simon Dibby, used to tell me it was about the vibe. So he'd say to me, make sure the vibe is right. Make sure the vibe is happening from when people walk in. So those things are emotive connections that people are walking into, and they're instantly feeling that there is a value in being a bar. Right, because the vibe is right, because the music is right, because they walked in, and instead of walking in and wondering, what do I do here, what do you sell, a really lovely, well-dressed bartender who's clean-shaven and doesn't look like he's been out all night on the piss walks up and says, good evening, how are you guys today? You good? What have you been up to? Oh, we've been out to dinner. Fantastic. Come in, grab a seat, let us get you a menu. We'll give you a talk through about what we do here. So those things, I guess, are emotive, like you said, in value, of making sure that the experience when people walk in is right. Yes, the quality is of a higher rate. I think everyone can agree that, especially with what we're doing here now, the average quality of the craft gin being produced in Melbourne is at a standard that is high enough that you feel that the value is inherent in the product. Does that apply for everyone? No. Does that apply for every age group? No. Are you going to be able to convey that to necessarily, and again, I'm not generalizing, but are you going to be able to convey that more easily to an 18 to 24-year-old, or convey that idea of value more easily to a 28 to 35-year-old who's more interested in the stuff that we spoke about, the idea of where it came from and what it did? Some people still want to walk in and order the cheapest thing on the menu. I guess that's alcohol for the sake of alcohol, or it's alcohol for the sake of experience. And there's this sort of funny dance that we have to do in the middle when people walk in to assess what's this person's value. My pet hate, if anyone ever asks me what my pet hates in the industry is, I hate walking into a bar and asking for a product and instantly being served an expensive product based on either maybe how I was dressed or how I looked or what my age demographic is. So I walk into a bar and order a gin tonic, and I say to the bartender, what do you got? And he says, I got a really nice gin. And he goes and puts it down in front of me, and it turns out it's a $22 gin. The idea of that has always upset me, and I sort of always try and say to the guys at the bar here, we've got such great products at the lower end of the price point. Let's make sure that people's first experience is one of value, and then we can build with them to get them into the more expensive things, to get them into the craft spirits. Or let's work out what level they're at, whether they are actually knowledgeable enough. Not even knowledgeable, but I guess knowledgeable, willing is another word. People have to be willing to want to learn and to want to listen to you. There's no point just talking at someone for 10 minutes and having them look at you sort of blank-eyed going, I really do not give two shits about the botanical base of this gin. I just really a drink today. I guess to bring it back to your answer, how do you sort of value it and how do you get that across? I think it's lots and lots of small pieces go into making a complete picture for someone, not necessarily one size fits all.
Yes, well, I think it's a concept that there's a difference between value and price. This determines a lot, and I learned this from economics that really drilled this in, because in accounting, your revenue is your revenue, your price is the value that you're giving. But in economics, value is a very abstract concept. And so I think about it as a very abstract thing, and then you can apply value in a marketing sense, which is along the economics definition. What people are willing to pay is what economics looks at, in which case it could be much higher than the value they receive, which is the difference between the price you charge and what they'd be willing to pay for that product.
Yeah, and the value of the experience therein as well. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, that's all part of it, right? The value of the experience that they're in is part of the value of the product that you're providing.
If you serve someone like, for example, a Bass and Flinders Angry Ant gin, it's a very specific gin, it's a very boutique gin, it's got a certain type of redwood that's been bored through by ants and they've left their pheromones behind. Like, yes, there is value in the fact that the gin tastes interesting, but the experience and the story of how that gin is made is more valuable than the actual changing of currency, because what tends to happen is the value is then when people go and tell people about that experience, and that's inherent value as well, because they leave and they say, I had this gin, it was amazing.
Yeah.
The thing I love, one of the things that makes my day every time is when we say something to someone over the bar and we see them very confidently pick their drink up and walk over to their friends and regurgitate what we've said. That is almost the value that they've paid for, in a sense, because they've been able to walk over this gin and stand in between their friends so confidently and say, did you know that this is this and it does this, and the pheromones that left behind give it a slight spice. Feel free, just touch it on the inside of your lip. You'll feel a little tingle, and all the friends are going like, yeah, this is amazing. This is amazing.
Yeah.
That guy is the shit. He's the man in that group just for that moment. And I think that is value. And I think that if, like what we were saying, if your bartenders aren't providing people with that information, but they're just pouring the drink in the glass and handing it to them and taking their money, then they're able to go and actually get that experience, which is inherently valuable to them outside of a monetary transaction.
That is very interesting, and we could tie in knowledge is power, for example. But what I really want to use with that is, instead of going down a knowledge is power route and thinking about philosophy, I want to target more of a psychological avenue and look at it like the value that they've paid for is to have social standing for a period of time, and everyone wants to feel important and valued. So doing that means that they feel important. If you can make them feel important, any patron, then they're going to love that experience. And I think that's a lot about the service that we provide.
100%, and that's my thing. I keep harping on. I keep coming back to within the industry is that this idea that alcohol is the king, that the alcohol is the main thing that people are coming in for. I think economically, as people become, tighter and tighter and tighter with their money, that idea of value is the thing that's going to keep bars alive. Not necessarily just putting booze in a drink and putting a drink out and having it taste nice, because that experience is there and it's done. If a bartender is making a cocktail, the way I've always taught my staff is you have, say, 3 minutes to engage, and that's free engagement because you're making the drink for them anyway. So, what are you going to do with that 3 minutes? How does that person want to be engaged? Now, whether that person wants to be engaged with the history of that drink, the story of the booze that's going into it, or just being asked about how their day was and what they've been up to, each one of those different things, it has a different value to that person. When people walk into a bar, they've got different markers that you need to pick up. Your first marker is, does this person want to socialize? Do they just want to come in? Have they had a shit day and they just want to come in, order the drink that they want, that they know they want, not be told anything about it, and just sit there and drink their drink and contemplate their life? Do they want to come into the bar and socialize with us? Do they want to come in the bar and learn about something? And that's really important within our industry, that the bartenders aren't just learning and making sure that they know their 50 classics and they know the production methods behind everything, but that they're interesting and that they're eager and that they want to engage on a level that is more than just the level of, I am serving you alcohol. Because when you talk about technology, a robot could do that. You could walk to a bar, you could pull out your iPhone, you could press 2 numbers on your phone. You could say, I would like an aviation and like an old fashioned. And, basically drinks are a recipe of certain components going into a drink with a certain amount of dilution reduced to a certain temperature. So when you take that element out of your game, if you are just a bartender who is someone who is someone who distributes drinks and doesn't engage so much, I look at it in the sense of, well, what more do you have that someone couldn't just sit there and put together a tap system that dropped alcohol out, and then that will be the end of the bartender. Be like Blade Runner, mate.
I think that there's always space for that human component. There will always be value, the human side of the industry, because a lot about hospitality revolves around that human component, whether it's delivery through service or analysis of the human condition, because we watch patrons as well. We watch what they're doing and we have to adapt. And there may be tools and systems that come into place that identify whether something might happen. Maybe because I know that there are camera systems I know that in casinos it's pretty crazy, but there are all sorts of systems that try to identify when problems are going to occur. Maybe that's going to come into place more widely. But I still think that there is always going to be room for humans to be undertaking our profession on some level. And across all industries, the menial nature of some tasks are being automated and being outsourced to robots and other machines. But then the people need to provide value in a different way, whether it's operating those machines or whether it's how are they going to elevate the value that they're providing to then move themselves to higher and higher levels.
Your ultimate value to me is your personality. Your ultimate value to me as a worker is your personality, is your ability to have emotions, your ability to connect with people on a level that is something greater. At the very start, I think you said to me, what are the things that keep you in hospitality? And I'm sure I rambled on a bunch of stuff, but I guarantee you one of the things in there was that I get to connect with 100 people a day. And I think that if you don't have that in the modern industry, now that drinks are $14 for a beer, $15 for a beer, $13 for a glass of wine. I mean, shit, when I was growing up, we would go out and we would drink, a packet of cigarettes was $7. The first beer I ate was $3 or $4. So I'm saying that as the monetary effect sort of trickles down, the importance becomes so much more to have more connection.
I look at it as an economist and go, okay, well, CPI's increased and the cost of living, where's that at in there? Is cost of living higher or lower, or is it the same? Or
I would say that for all of the CPI increase in the hospitality experience, I can tell you unequivocally that in 15 years in the industry, the most amount of money I ever made in this industry was 8 years ago.
So it's decreased since then?
I don't think it's decreased. I think it hasn't gone anywhere. You speak to chef friends of mine, you speak to bar manager friends of mine. 10 years ago, we were capable of earning, let's say, the top money for a hospitality service professional. So that's a service professional, meaning that they're either going to be a bar manager. Your top money was probably $70,000. 10 years down the line, it's still $70,000. That wage bracket hasn't moved in hospitality. I speak to people who work in the corporate profession, and their wages pop 4% every year. They have to. 4% every year, year on year. In hospitality, that's not happening. We're still earning the same that we were earning 10 years ago. The difference is that the prices are so much more, but we're not growing with it. So whether or not that's just our industry and whether that's not, a large conversation for a whole nother podcast. I could do a rant-worthy podcast, the lack of
I'm sure.
wage growth and penalty rates and things like that forever.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show today, Max. It's been awesome having you, and looking forward to being part of your journey as you grow.
Thank you so much, mate.
The episode today was produced by Sweet As Sound, comprising of myself and Angus Brennan. If you're interested in digital content for hospitality, follow us now at Sweet As Sound.